Okay, so very excited about today's class. It's a fascinating topic. Most of what we're going to learn about today is straight out of the Kutei Sichos from the Rebbe's Sichos in a number of
We
places.
lost screen share.
Yes, we'll go screen share soon.
Okay.
And most of what we're going to say is from the Rebbe's Sichos in a number of places, including one of the Sichos, which is under the project Likutei Sichos for this week, which is the Hanukkah Sicha from volume 10 of Likutei Sichos. So before we get into the text and to the screen share, I'm going to put a question out to the crowd. Is anybody in person in the shul who wants to answer, or anybody on Zoom? Why do we light the menorah? Why do we light the menorah on Hanukkah? Dan, you want to start?
I assume it's recognition of the events of Hanukkah. The
Okay.
events of Hanukkah.
Okay, so
Memorial.
you're alluding, so it's in recognition to the event of Hanukkah or to the events of Hanukkah. What would event of Hanukkah refer to, and what does events of Hanukkah refer to?
It would be the war with the Greeks.
Okay.
The successful reconquering of the temple, and its rededication for its proper use.
Okay, so you're saying that we light the menorah because of celebrating the recapturing of the temple and the reconsecrating it and starting again to use it for its proper use. Those are all
and part of that has to do, of course, with the use of the menorah. So the menorah is the symbol of the successful rededication and the miracle that occurred, the oil.
Okay, very good. So I was wondering why that was missing, right? I thought that the first thing you would say is because the miracle was that the oil burns for 8 days. So we light the menorah for 8 days. But you're saying that in addition to that, you believe that we light the menorah also to recognize the other miracles of Hanukkah as well.
The few over the many, it's all listed.
It's all listed in the prayer of Alanism, the few over the many, the weak over the mighty. And so we light the menorah to commemorate that. Why do you think we light the menorah to commemorate? What's the connection? Why do we light candles to commemorate the victory of a war?
It's not the victory of the war. It's the expression of God over godliness, the pious over the non-pious. It's a recognition that the Almighty One, blessed be He, allowed this to happen.
Okay.
And so in a miraculous way rather than a natural way.
Okay.
So the menorah is one of these many miracles.
Got it. So you're saying it's all about the miracles of what are we doing to commemorate the miraculous victory of the war? Why is that? How is that alluded to in the menorah? Or are you saying that we're only commemorating the spiritual aspect of that?
You wouldn't be able to light the menorah without the other victories and the other miracles.
Amazing.
The fact of the oil lasts in the 8 days. All of these miracles are integrated into the festival of Hanukkah.
Okay, so Dan is claiming that all of the miracles of Hanukkah are integrated together, and they all find their expression in the miracle of the oil burning for 8 days and in the kindling of the menorah, which is a tremendously profound idea, and we will elaborate on that approach to it towards the end of today's class. One of the very important aspects of Hanukkah is the victory of the war, which can be seen, and certainly, many do see it as being unrelated to the miracle of the oil. In other words, there was a threat to the very existence of the Jewish nation, and al pi teva, by way of the order of this world, the Jews didn't stand a chance. And there was a miraculous victory, like you said, of the few over the many. And as the question is posed by many, and in Chassidus it's often quoted from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, why don't we find an explicit celebration of the victory of the war, just like we find by Purim and any other time as the famous, they tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. So why don't we find that when it comes to Hanukkah? But what I would like to start with today is presenting that actually the lighting of the menorah is both. And here we're going to share the screen, and we'll start off by looking at the Rambam. Okay, we're going to read these three halachas in the Rambam. Actually, we could read it from here. It might be easier. Or if we go here, let's just do the English here. Okay. In the era of the Second Temple, the Greek kingdom, this is the laws of Hanukkah chapter 3, but it's really chapter 1 of Hanukkah, because chapters 1 and 2 are the laws of Purim and Megillah, and chapter 3 and 4 are the laws of Hanukkah. So this is where the Rambam introduces the whole concept of Hanukkah. In the era of the Second Temple, the Greek kingdom issued decrees against the Jewish people, attempting to nullify their faith and refusing to allow them to observe the Torah and its commandments. They extended their hands against their property and their daughters. They entered the sanctuary, wrought havoc within, and made the holy things impure, the pure things impure. The Jews suffered great difficulties from them, for they oppressed them greatly, until the God of our ancestors had mercy upon them, delivered them from their hand, and saved them. The sons of the Hashmonaim, the high priests, overcame them, slew them, and saved the Jews from their hand. They appointed a king from the priests, and the sovereignty returned to Israel for more than 200 years until the destruction of the Second Temple. So section 1 of this parak, halacha aleph of this parak, talks about the terrible threat that the Jews faced by the Greeks and how they miraculously overcame them. Section 2, when the Jews overcame their enemies and destroyed them, they entered the sanctuary. This was on the 25th day of Kislev, which, by the way, as they point out in the footnote here, that many authorities, including the Alter Rebbe, actually say that the victory happened on the 24th day of Kislev, and similar to Purim, we celebrate the day after the victory. Anyway, that's a side point. They could not find any pure oil in the sanctuary with the exception of a single cruse. It contained enough oil to burn for merely 1 day. They lit the arrangement of the candles from it for 8 days. Arrangement of candles, Neres HaMaracha, refers to the light of the menorah, until they could crush olives and produce pure oil. Okay, so section 2 recounts the miracle of the oil. Accordingly, literally, the Hebrew words are mipnei zeh, because of this, which this presumably refers to everything we've just said, both in halacha aleph and in halacha beis. Because of this, the sages of that generation ordained that these 8 days, which begin with the 25th of Kislev, should be commemorated to be days of happiness and praise of God. Candles should be lit in the evening at the entrance to the houses, and each and every one of these 8 nights, on each and every one of these nights, to publicize and reveal the miracle. Again, let's read these words again. Make sure we take all the words in, because we're going to have to review them soon. They should be commemorated to be days of happiness and praise of God. Those are the 2 characteristics of Hanukkah, happiness and praise of God. And then he finishes off that these days are called Hanukkah. It's forbidden to eulogize and fasten them as the days of Purim. And lighting the candles on these days is a rabbinic mitzvah, like reading the Megillah. Okay, so from the Rambam, it's very clear that lighting the candles is commemorating, not just lighting the candles, but the entire notion of Hanukkah, and specifically lighting the candles, is commemorating 2 things. Commemorating halacha aleph, the victory over the Greeks and their oppression, and it's also commemorating the miracle of the oil. Now, I just want to get into a little bit more detail and places where we see this emphasis that the candles actually have a dual function. They're commemorating 2 aspects of the kindnesses that Hashem did to us. Another place we see this is the famous question. It's known as the question of the Beis Yosef. Why do we have 8 days of Hanukkah? If the miracle was only for 7 days, why do we have 8 days of Hanukkah, right? Because the oil was enough to burn for 1 day, so the miracle was only for 7 days. And there are many, many answers given. I think there's a book that compiled over 600 answers to this question. But one of the famous answers is the answer of Rabbi Marinelli's Rebbe, the Meiri. And he says that the reason why the first day of Hanukkah is a miracle is because that's celebrating the first day, is celebrating the victory of the war. So Hanukkah day 1 celebrates the victory of the war, and Hanukkah days 2 to 8 commemorate the miracle of the oil. But yet, even according to the Meiri, obviously, we light the menorah on the first day of Hanukkah. So clearly the menorah is not merely or not only for commemorating the victory of the war, it's also commemorating it's not only commemorating the miracle of the oil, it's also commemorating the victory of the war. Now, another few places where we would see this is in the text of Haneres Halalu, which, let's see if we have it over here. I think we do. No, we don't. Okay, in the text of Haneres Halalu that we say after we light the menorah, we finish off that we are lighting these candles, lahodos lahalal, to thank, lahalal, and to praise, l'shumcha gadol, to your great name, al nisecha, for your miracles, nisleisecha, for your wonders, al yishoisecha, and on your salvations. And the truth is, we have the same 3 descriptions in the beginning: Haneres Halalu al madlikin al hachuis v'al hanisim al inflois, for the salvations, the miracles, and the wonders. The Rabbi actually discusses in one of the sikhs why the order of those 3 phrases changes from the beginning to the end of Haneres Halalu. But what do those 3 things refer to? Miracles, wonders, and salvations. So we can analyze what exactly miracles and wonders refer to, but salvations would most obviously be an appropriate description, not for the miracle of the oil, because that wasn't a salvation, so to speak. The salvation refers to the salvation of over the Greek army, the victory over the Greek army. So while we're lighting the candles, even though, again, the obvious thing is you're lighting candles in day 1, day 2, day 3, you go up every day 1 candle to commemorate the miracle of the oil, but we're also explicitly acknowledging Val Yishoy Secha, for your salvation, that Hashem saved us from the Greek army. So that's another place where we see this connection between lighting the menorah and the victory of the war. Another very interesting one is, first of all, if we look here and then we look very closely at the words of the Rambam, he says, it's later on, it's in the next chapter, chapter 4, in Halacha Yud Beis. He says, the mitzvah of kindling Hanukkah lamps is very dear. A person should be very careful in its observance to publicize the miracle and thus increase our praise of God and our expression of thanks for the miracles which he wrought on our behalf. So the Rambam uses the plural of the word miracles here, which again, what are the plural of the miracles? One possible way of understanding it would be that he's talking not just to the, again, it can't be, there's only one miracle of the oil. If you're talking about miracle in the plural, then it has to also include the miracles of the war. Now, those paying extra close attention might notice that within this Rambam itself, there seems to be a little bit of a, if you would, a contradiction, because he says here to publicize the miracle, and then later he says to thank Hashem for the miracles, which perhaps we'll get back to that question in a moment. But from the fact that the Rambam uses the plural of the word miracles, it's evident that he holds that lighting of the menorah is also in commemoration of the victory of the war. And finally, the Gemara says that Nashim Chayavis B'ner Chanukah She'af Hein Hoyos Beis Haines. We know that the general principle is that women are exempt from time-bound positive mitzvahs. So you would think that women should be exempt from the lighting the Hanukkah menorah. But the Gemara says that Hanukkah is an exception. Why? Because Af Hein Hoyos Beis Haines, because women were also in the nest of Hanukkah. We've discussed this concept in the past. There's 2 ways to understand what that means. Either it means that they were also saved by the miracle of Hanukkah because they because they were the entire Jewish nation was under threat, and the entire keeping mitzvahs of the Jews were under threat, including the women. Their mitzvahs, their existence was also under threat. So they were also saved, and therefore that's what it means that they were also saved by Hanukkah. And therefore, even though it's time-bound mitzvah, they do have to do it. An alternative explanation brought by Tosfos, if I recall correctly, B'Shem Rabbeinu Shmuel, that not only were they also involved in the miracle, but actually they were a key element of the miracle, because the miracle came about by a Jewish woman whose name was Yehudis, who tricked the Greek general and was able to gain his confidence and bring him to a vulnerable situation, and she was able to kill him. Be that as it may, which miracle are we talking about? Whichever interpretation of Afhinoi B'Yisanes, we're saying that the women were saved by the miracle of the victory of the victory over the Greeks, and therefore they also have to celebrate Hanukkah. But we don't say therefore they also have to say Val Hanissim or say Halal. We say therefore they have to light the menorah, right? So clearly from this Gemara would be proof that lighting the menorah is actually in commemoration not just of the miracle of the oil, but also of the miracle of the victory over the Greeks, which, despite Dan's what we call pshitos, I think that is a novelty. I don't think that would be obvious to most people that we're lighting the menorah not just for the miracle of the oils, but also for the victory over the war. But well done, Dan. Okay. Now, before we continue, so the next stage in this exercise. Oh, I'll actually just bring you one more. I'll show you one more interesting diuk in the Rambam. If you look back at the Rambam we were looking at before, he says, okay, so again, somewhat lost in translation, so let's look at the Hebrew here. He says, Umadlikin bahen haneros, we light, on the days of Hanukkah, we light the candles in the evenings on the doors of the home, outside our homes, right? Now, the word the candles seems a little bit inappropriate. It's assuming that we have candles and it's telling you that the place to light them is outside. It would appear to be more appropriate to say we light candles outside. We light the candles outside assumes that you're already lighting candles, and I'm now telling you that the place to light those candles is outside. So it has been suggested, I saw this is not actually from this, I saw this suggested by Rabbi Kamilson, who's a Rosh Hashiva in Connecticut, I think, New Haven, Connecticut. And what he suggests is that actually these two aspects of we light the menorah to celebrate the miracle of the victory of the war, and also for the miracle of the oil, relate to these two things. That because that we find in general, and we'll get back to this later, where we see other places where lighting candles is a form of thanking Hashem for the miracle. It has been argued that even in Val Hanissim, at the end of the prayer of Val Hanissim, where we say, and they lit, where is it? Here. Then your children entered the shrine of your sanctuary, cleansed your temple, and purified the sanctuary, and kindled lights in your holy courtyards. These kindled lights in your holy courtyards is referring to candles that the Jews lit as part of thanksgiving to Hashem for the miracles. So we light candles on Hanukkah to thank Hashem for the miracle of the victory of the war. And then there's an additional thing that because there was an additional miracle of the oil burning for 8 days, that's why we take them. That's why we have the concept of Pirsume Nisa, of publicizing the miracle again, because the miracle of the victory of the war was obvious for everyone to see. The miracle of the 8 days, only those people who had access to the temple, they were able to see it. So that's why there's this concept which we call Pirsume Nisa. We want to go out of our way to publicize it, and that's why we light the candles outside. So based on that, he reads the Rambam as follows. We light candles. Hadlakas, if you go to the end, lighting candles on these days is a rabbinic mitzvah, like reading the Megillah on Purim. Just like we read the Megillah on Purim to thank for the miracle of Purim, on Hanukkah we light candles for the celebration of the war. But then we take the candles, those candles which you're going to light anyway, right? And we make sure to put them outside because that publicizes the miracle. And then if we, after with this understanding, if we go back to the halacha we were looking at before in chapter 4, where we have this discrepancy between the Rambam using the singular and the plural of the word miracles. It all makes sense because he says a person should be very careful in its observance to publicize the miracle. Right? When we're talking about publicizing it, the relevant point is the miracle in the singular, referring to the miracle of the oil. But later he says, thus increase our praise of God, an expression of thanks for the miracles. Now we're talking about the notion in general of lighting candles, which refers to both. Anyway, summarize what we've covered so far. We've demonstrated from numerous places that the lighting the menorah is a commemoration for both of the miracles. Now, if we are, and let's see if this is going to work on my computer here. If we are to take this Rambam that we have just learned, hold on. There we go. I'm making it a bit smaller so we should be able to see the whole thing on the screen here. And then if we are to put next to this Rambam, the Gemara, which is obviously the source of the Rambam, let's see the Gemara. And hopefully we could pay close attention and see that there are a number of differences between the Rambam and the Gemara. The Gemara asks, the Gemara, so this is the Gemara over here, it's Gemara in Shabbos, and here we have the translation, which I assume comes from Rabbi Steinsaltz. So the bold is the literal translation, the not bold is just words to string the phrases together. So the Gemara asks, "My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah?" Rashi says, "My Hanukkah al eza nes kavauha." Look at here, Rashi. My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? Meaning, for which miracle is Hanukkah established? The Gemara answers, the sages taught in Megillah Tanis on the 25th day of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8, when we not eulogize on them and when we not fast on them. What's the reason? Because when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them, and when the Chashmonaim overcame them, they emerged victorious over them. They searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, understood by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light for the Menorah for only one day. But a miracle occurred and they lit the Menorah from it from 8 days. And the next year, the Chachamim instituted those days and made them holidays with the recitation of Halal and special thanksgiving. Period. Okay, so that's how the Gemara tells us what Hanukkah is all about. Now, let's go to the crowd and see what differences do you notice between the Rambam and the Gemara. David Yehuda, do you want to go first? What's the difference between the Rambam, those three halachas which we read in the Rambam over here, where he introduces what Hanukkah is all about, versus this paragraph in the Gemara?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Anybody else want to guess? Reb Avram, Reb Bob, Reb Dan, Ari, Bill, anyone? Ariel? Any offers before I go?
In any way?
So Bill is asking, does the Gemara mention the war in any way? So that is the first obvious difference between the Rambam. Now the Gemara does allude to the war, certainly, but if you look at it carefully, you'll see the context is very different. The Gemara says, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils, and when they became victorious, they only found one jug of oil. In other words, the Gemara mentions the war only parenthetically, by the way, and just as a reference, like we're telling you when this story happened, we're telling you the story of the oil. And as a reference to when it happened, we say when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled the oils, right? But the fact that there was a war and they were victorious and that's part of this whole thing is completely absent from the Gemara. Whereas in the Rambam, not only is it not absent, that's what he starts with. He starts with talking about the details of the war, which he doesn't get from the Gemara. Obviously, he has other sources for it. But he doesn't, he talks about how terrible the war was and all these things that happened and how they overcame them. And then he says in Halacha Beis, number 2, he talks about the miracle of the oil. And then he says accordingly, which as we noted before, refers to all of the above. All of this is included in accordingly. That's why we have Hanukkah. Right? So where does the Rambam get that from? The Gemara doesn't seem to say. The Gemara says that we have Hanukkah and all these, that's all to do with the miracle of the oil. Okay, that's the primary difference between the Rambam and the Gemara. Another another important difference between the Rambam and the Gemara is that when the Gemara says what Hanukkah is, so he said first over here it says that the Chachamim instituted them and made them days with the recitation of Hallel and Thanksgiving, which we'll see soon what that word Thanksgiving means. But those are the characteristics of Hanukkah: Hallel and Thanksgiving, and of course not eulogizing, right? And the Rambam, there's another word. The Rambam over here says that they're commemorated to be days of happiness and praise. So praise of God, that matches up with Hallel. The word Hallel means to praise. But this word happiness that the Rambam puts in is not found in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't say anywhere that there was that the day that Hanukkah are days of happiness. So where does the Rambam get that from? And what does it mean, practically speaking, that it's days of happiness? Of course, in halacha, everything has an exact meaning. So, if we say happiness, there's parameters to what that means. Sorry? Praise, right. So praise is halal, right? And then we also have this word in the Gemara, thanksgiving, which is not to be found, at least not in this part of the Rambam. But it is found later, like we saw before. Was it there? I think it was there. Over here, the Rambam says Thanksgiving, no? Expression of thanks, yeah, for the miracle. So the Rambam does talk about Thanksgiving. Okay, so in order to understand this, we're going to sort of put all of this on hold. We'll learn another text, and then we'll come back, and hopefully everything will fall into place, and we'll have a much better understanding of the Rambam's entire approach to Hanukkah. And then, time permitting, we'll also look into Rashi's approach to Hanukkah, which, as you'll see, is going to be much more in line with Dan Kulish's approach to Hanukkah. So, I'm going to read to you from the Tur in the Laws of Hanukkah. So it's in Tur Siman Tofresh Ayin, chapter 670. The Torah starts like this. My Hanukkah. Sorry, just a moment here. So the Torah starts by basically quoting the Gemara almost verbatim. And he finishes off by saying like this. The Maharam Rothenberg, we've discussed it many times, one of the primary Ashkenazic authorities, he says that the extensive, maybe, meals that we do on Hanukkah, so we have Hanukkah parties, those are optional. There's no mitzvah to have Hanukkah parties. People do it, that's fine. Nothing bad, but it's not a mitzvah to have a meal on Hanukkah. Because the days of Hanukkah were established only as praise and thank, again, borrowing those words from the Gemara that we saw, to praise Hashem and to thank Hashem, but not for dining and banquets and simcha, not for rejoicing. The words mishta v'simcha should be that sort of combination of those two words, mishta v'simcha, feasting and rejoicing, should be familiar to us from Purim, where in the Megillah it's explicit that the days of Purim were established as Yemei Mishta v'Simcha, days of feasting and celebrating. Now, one of the classic commentaries on the Torah is the Bach, and he focuses on this piece of the Torah, and he says, I don't understand. Why? Why is Hanukkah different than Purim? Why is it that on Purim we celebrate with a Mishta v'Simcha, with feasting and dining and rejoicing, and on Hanukkah in other words, the Torah has just said that Hanukkah was not established in that way, so therefore you don't. The meals are optional. It's not a mitzvah to have meals. But the Bach says Hagufa kasha. Why? Why did Chazal not make Hanukkah be that way? Says the Bach, it appears to me that on Purim the primary decree was because they benefited from the Suda of Achashverosh. In other words, they indulged in materially, physically, in the pleasures that Achashverosh had to offer them. And therefore it was decreed upon them to be annihilated, that their bodies, their physical bodies, should be annihilated. And therefore, because there was a miracle of a victory of the physical existence of the Jewish people, the bodies, therefore, it was brought about by them fasting. We know that fasting is a big theme in the Megillah, because that was sort of to undo the physical pleasure they derived was sort of countered by the fasting that they endured. And therefore, it's celebrated by, again, a physical mode expressed in a physical way of feasting on food. No halal on Purim is Gemara says, at least according to one opinion in the Gemara, is because the Megillah takes the place of halal, which according to that opinion, at least in theory, in other words, halal is appropriate on Purim. We just don't say, instead of saying Psalms 113 through 118, we say the Megillah. Whereas on Hanukkah, the primary decree was because they neglected their service of Hashem, so it was a spiritual thing, and therefore the Greeks, like the Rambam talks about, made decrees against keeping of religion, and therefore when we celebrate it, how do we celebrate a spiritual miracle, a spiritual victory, our spiritual salvation, with a spiritual expression found in the burning of a candle and all the spirituality that goes with fire and candles and oil and all that good stuff. And he goes on to say, however, that's just explaining the Torah. However, in halachically speaking, and he brings a number of sources that point to, and specifically the Marshal himself, the Amshel Shlomo, says this in the Rambam, that as we saw before, the Rambam explicitly says that Hanukkah are days of celebration, and the days of celebration, Simcha, when you say Simcha in Halacha, it means to eat meat, to eat a meal, and possibly also eat meat. That's a separate discussion, whether Simcha has to include eating a fleshik meal. There's a discussion on Purim Gufa. The Rambam paskins that you have to eat meat on Purim. We certainly paskin that it's best to eat meat on Purim. I don't know if we paskin that as an absolute must. But certainly one is supposed to eat meat on Purim. But the upshot of it is that according to the Rambam, who explicitly says that the days of Purim the days of Hanukkah, are days of Simcha, that according to the Rambam, the meals that we have on Hanukkah, the Hanukkah parties, would be not just optional, but an actual mitzvah. I don't know if the Rambam, I don't know. Would the Rambam require a special Hanukkah meal on every day of the 8 days, or exactly what the parameters of those meals would be? But certainly celebrating in a, quote, physical way, as we do on Purim, would be on Hanukkah as well. It wouldn't be the same as Purim. There's no mitzvah to get drunk. On Purim, there's a mitzvah to get drunk. It's different. And certainly, even according to the Rambam, on Purim, there was a stronger emphasis on the annihilation of the Jewish body. And on Hanukkah, it's certainly more than Purim, an emphasis on the Jewish soul. But nevertheless, there is a celebration of Simcha on Hanukkah, according to the Rambam, of physical rejoicing. And so this brings us back to this Gemara, which we were looking at before. That, again, how does the Rambam understand this Gemara? There's no mention of Simcha over here, and where does the Rambam get it from? And so the Rabbi suggests as follows, that actually, when the Gemara introduces this concept with the question, "My Hanukkah," what is Hanukkah? And we said Rashi translates those words, "What is Hanukkah? For which miracle was Hanukkah established?" The Rambam does not. The Rambam doesn't learn like Rashi. The Rambam says no. The question, "My Hanukkah," is not why was Hanukkah established. Why was Hanukkah established? Obviously, because there was a victory of the war. Because according to the Rambam, that is so obvious it need not be stated. The fact that there were Jewish people who were in threat, that they were going to be annihilated by the Greeks, and they were going to be annihilated physically and religiously. They were going to, what's the lashon of here? Bitlu dasam. The Greek issued decrees against the Jewish people attempting to nullify their faith, right? So the fact that there was that victory of the war, it obviously calls for celebration, for days of simcha, for days of rejoicing, of happiness, as the Rambam says. And the reason the Gemara doesn't mention that is because it's so obvious it goes without saying. When the Gemara says my Hanukkah, the Gemara is asking another question. The Gemara is asking why. The Gemara is asking why do we say halal on Hanukkah? Just a moment. So in the Rambam's reading, the Gemara here is my Hanukkah. We know why we're rejoicing on Hanukkah. But why were they specifically, why did they make the mitzvah of halal and hidah on Hanukkah? And just to a little bit contradict what I said before, on Purim, we don't have halal. Now, according to one out of three answers in the Gemara, the Megillah takes the place of halal, but the other two opinions of the Gemara say, no, we're not going to say halal. According to one opinion, it's because it happened in Chutz La'aretz, because the Katav did the Chashvei Shanan, but be that as it may, the Gemara is just addressing the question, why do we say halal on Hanukkah? And on that, the Gemara says the reason why we say halal specifically is because of the miracle of the oil. Okay, so in the Rambam's books, why we celebrate Hanukkah sort of as a generically? Obviously, for two reasons. Like we just started off with today, where we see all these references that, according to the Rambam, it's very obvious that there's two reasons for lighting the menorah, and in general, there's two reasons for celebrating Hanukkah. The two are very interlinked. The two, in other words, the Rambam holds, just to bring this out, the Rambam holds that the halal is for the miracle of the oil. The being happy, the rejoicing, is for the miracle of the victory of the war, and lighting the menorah is for both, right? But how many days do we have to be happy for? How many days are Yemei Simcha? All 8 days are Yemei Simcha, days of happiness. Because once we have the victory of the war and we have the miracle of the oil, the two interlink and overlap. And as we'll see soon, according to Rashi, they are even deeper and strong. The overlap and the link between the two is even deeper and stronger, to the extent that one fades into oblivion in the face of the other, as Dan was alluding to before. But according to the Rambam, there's 2 points. There's two things over here. There's the victory of the war, which calls for days of happiness. That the Gemara doesn't even need to say; it goes without saying. Possibly the Rambam has other sources for it in a Medrash or whatever it is, but the Gemara doesn't need to say it. Then there's another thing that we say Hallel for the victory, the miracle of the oil, and like we said before, we light the menorah for both. Now, before we move on to Rashi, I just want to point out to one extra. We noted before this word Thanksgiving. The Gemara says that Hanukkah is celebrated by Hallel and Thanksgiving. Now, what does that word Thanksgiving mean? Sorry, Turkey. Don't let my light hear you say that. Exactly. Hoidu means to thank, and Turkey is Hoidu. Very good. Okay. Bob, I didn't know your Hebrew was becoming so polished. Okay. Now Rashi says, and for some reason on this source sheet they did not quote this Rashi. Rashi says that the word Hodah, Thanksgiving, refers to saying the prayer of Al Hanissim. Now, that in and of itself is strange, because Al Hanissim doesn't talk about the miracle of the oil. It only talks about the miracle of the war, right? What do we say in Al Hanissim? Right? There was the victory of the many over the few, and the few over the many, and the weak over the many, right? There's no mention at all of the miracle of the oil. Some say it's alluded to in these words, they kindled the lights in your holy courtyards. As we said before, others say that kindled lights in your holy courtyards refers to lights that they lit as thanksgiving for the miracle, but there's certainly no explicit reference to the miracle of the oil. So when you say that they made that because of the miracle of the oil, they instituted Thanksgiving, it seems strange that should be referring to Valanisim, which is the claim that Rashi makes. But there are two other possibilities of what that word means, which would fit better with the Rambam. Number one, Thanksgiving could refer to Halal. Halal and Thanksgiving could be synonyms, because in Halal we have the words Hodu, Hodu Hashem Kitov, right? Thank Hashem. So Halal and Hodu, Halal of Hodu for praise, Halal, and Thanksgiving could be synonyms for saying Halal, which would explain why in this halacha the Rambam just says happiness and praise of God. He doesn't mention Thanksgiving, because praise and Thanksgiving are synonyms. There's actually my friend. The Alter Rebbe talks about this because we're learning in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch the laws of saying Hashem's name in vain. So there's this whole discussion about are you allowed to say thank God, right? And the Alter Rebbe has this whole discussion where there's a difference between thanking and blessing. Right, so we could get into a whole debate, but let's just say that for this, the Rambam he just says praise of God, and he doesn't say Thanksgiving, because praise, Halal, Thanksgiving, it's synonymous. And as we saw in the next chapter over there, he says only Thanksgiving, and he doesn't say praise. An alternative suggestion is, where is it? Here he's talking, an alternative suggestion is actually based on this halacha over here, where it says the mitzvah of kindling lamps on Hanukkah is very dear. A person should be very careful of his observance, the problem has a miracle, and thus increase our praise of God and our expression of thanks for the miracles. So here, the Rambam says that lighting the menorah is a way of thanking Hashem for the miracles. And so perhaps, and this is again a suggestion from Rabbi Kalmanson, that the Rambam would say that the word thanksgiving in the Gemara refers to not the prayer of Al Hanisim, but to the lighting of the candle. So Halal, praise, refers to recitation of Halal, and Thanksgiving is either synonymous for Halal or it means lighting the candles. Okay. Now, so now let's move on to Rashi. Rashi holds that the way Rashi reads the Gemara is that my Hanukkah means what is Hanukkah? What again, these are the words of Rashi. For which miracle was Hanukkah established? So according to Rashi, the Gemara says, for which miracle was Hanukkah established? And what does the Gemara answer? Only the miracle of the oil. It doesn't make any reference at all to the miracle of the war. Right? So that's very strange. Why is that missing from the Gemara according to Rashi? And Rashi and the Torah, like we saw, indeed hold that there is no miracle. There is no mitzvah to celebrate, to be happy and joyous on Hanukkah. With according to them, the Hanukkah parties are optional. They are not mitzvah. Why? Why is there no, right? So we've already pointed out the Bach, the Levush. There's all these sources that associate partying, feast, with a physical victory and candles and that prayer and all that stuff with the spiritual victory. Okay, granted, but why? If so, why? Why would Rashi and the Torah and all the others who say that there's no mitzvah to have Hanukkah parties? Why not? There was a physical victory. So why are we ignoring the physical victory and only talking about in this Gemara about the spiritual victory? Really brings why was my microphone just changed? Should have been that all along. Anyway, so the truth is that everyone, the Rambam and Rashi, everyone agrees that the two are associated, that the spiritual and the physical victory over here, the miracle of the oil, it's all connected. The Rambam says it's all connected, but there's also two things which warrant, so each one warrants its own attention. And according to Rashi and the Torah, everything is in the menorah. The miracle of the oil is expressive of everything that Hanukkah is all about. And the truth is, if we could borrow the words of the Rambam here in explaining Rashi, the Rambam says, what is the first thing they did? He introduces this, right? The Greek kingdom issued decrees against the Jewish people to nullify their faith, ubitl dasam. right? That's the first thing. The first thing the Greeks wanted to do was abolish Jewish faith. How'd they do that? Okay, then there's the details. They refused them to allow Torah observance. They attacked their property. They attacked their daughters. They made decrees against Shabbos, against circumcision. Those are all, that's the strategy. But what's the sort of, what's the goal? What are they trying to accomplish? That's the first thing. They're trying to accomplish nullifying their faith. The Rambam also agrees to that. This is the Rambam. But the way Rashi and the Torah see it is that actually all of this is finds its expression in the miracle of the Menorah burning for 8 days. Because once we understand that the Greeks' primary goal, this was their motto, let's nullify their faith. The Medrash says, this quotes this all the time, that they said, Kisu lechem al kayin asher, right on the horns of an ox, which I guess in modern terms would be right on the billboards. In other words, put on your bumper stickers on your cars. She'ein lechem kechelek belekei Yisrael, that you don't have a portion in the God of Israel. The Greeks' Hellenist campaign was against God, against spirituality. And like the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe often quoted this from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that they didn't even mind that the Jews would keep mitzvahs per se. What really bothered them was the religion of the keeping mitzvahs, the spirituality, the fact that we say we keep mitzvahs even if we don't understand them. If you say, Shabbos is so meaningful to me, I get to disconnect from the world and I turn off my phone and have family time. Cool, that's a nice value. We get that. The Greeks, they want us to be cultured, and the Greeks are cool with that. But if you say, Shabbos is tough and I'm alone and it's Corona and I can't be in touch with my family and I sit there and I get depressed and I can't go to shul and I can't do anything. But nevertheless, God just wants you to stay in bed the whole Shabbos and not turn on your phone and not drive and not be with friends and thing. But because you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Hashem, that is of ultimate value, even when there's no personal meaning or identifying with it. That's something the Greeks couldn't tolerate. And that's why, of course, the strategy was don't do mitzvahs. But the point of it was nullify their faith. First, we need to nullify their faith. The strategy is to target specific mitzvahs. And this is why, if we look at the text of Al Anissim, I'll point out to a number of things. Whoops. No, what happened to that? Oh, it's the other window. Sorry, hold on. Here it is. If we look at the text of Al Anissim, what do we talk about? So a few things. First of all, it says, they wanted to make your people forget your Torah, to violate the decrees of your will. And we know chukim in all mitzvahs are divided into edus, chukim, and mishpatim. Chukim specifically refers to the decrees, to those mitzvahs which don't make any sense, which are not paraduma, shatnas, kosher, all the things which we don't necessarily have a reason for. Those are the things that the Greeks were bothered by. And again, the Rambam says they decreed against other things also. They decreed against everything. But that was a strategy. But the core of what their goal was to violate the decrees of your will. And this found expression in every part of the story. And if you look at the next section of Al Anissim, what do we say? But you in your abundant mercy stood by them in the time of their distress. You waged their battles, defended their rights, and avenged the wrong done to them. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the wanton sinners into the hands of those who occupy themselves with Torah. Now again, we're talking here about the victory of a war. If you tell me that you delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, okay, that's miraculous. I get that. If you say you delivered the many into the hands of the few, that's miraculous. I get that. But why, in talking about the victory of the war, would we talk about the impure into the hands of the pure? Since when does the purity of the soldiers, or the wicked and the righteousness of the soldiers, have any role in the strategic planning of a battle and who's more likely or less likely to be victorious. And of course, the answer is because that's the point. The point over here, the point of the war, yes, there was a war, and yes, it was a physical war, and there was a battlefield, and there was blood and bloodshed, and it was nasty. But the point of it was all this. This was the reason why they did it, the impure into the hands of the pure. What did the Yevonim do? They came and desecrated the temple, and then what they do? They find all the oil. They want the Jews not to light the menorah. What would you expect them to do? You would expect them. Oh, you'd expect them to loot the place, to pour out the oil, to get rid of it, steal it, take it away. They don't. They leave the oil there. We don't mind if you light the menorah, but they made it impure. Why'd they make it impure? Because Tumah and Tara, spiritual, what we call, again, we use the words in English, purity and impurity, but there's nothing scientific about it. It's not like you could take the oil to a lab and see any difference between this oil and that oil. The oil is the same. It's God, the super-rational mitzvahs, which tell you, and that's the difference. If you tell the Greeks we want to light the menorah, and this is such a beautiful symbolism and light and warmth, and there's so much meaning to be found in that, and we're not against that. Torah encourages us to find meaning and significance in mitzvahs, but we find significance and meaning in the mitzvahs built up on the foundation of a commitment to God and His Torah and His mitzvahs, which is beyond and sometimes even defies logic and meaning and rationale and emotional and mental connection or whatever it is. That's where the Greeks have a problem, and therefore they say, you want to light the menorah and you find meaning in it, that's beautiful, but don't tell me you need pure oil. And that's why they defiled the oil. And that's why when, according to Rashi, yes, of course there was a victory of a war, but what was it all really about? It was really all about the neshama of a Yid, the neshama of a Jew, the neshama of Judaism, the neshama, the core, the soul of our connection with Hashem. And therefore, if you want to sort of wrap it up and summarize, what is this all about? This is all about lighting the menorah with pure olive oil in the temple. And that's why we commemorate it with lighting the menorah. So yes, even when we light the menorah, we have this illusion of Yeshua Secha, your salvations, which refers to the war. And we have all these illusions, and we even have Al Hanissim, which only talks about the war, which is another discussion. But at the core of it is all about, that's really what it's all about. And that's why there is no a celebration of days of rejoicing and feasting like we have in Purim. Because in Hanukkah, yes, there was a threat to the Jewish physical survival, but that threat was a mere expression of the threat to their spiritual survival and B'chlal Masai Mana, and that's why we only lighting the menorah says it all according to Rashi. So L'chaim, and first of all, let's take the message of Rashi and remember the importance of our connection with Hashem and His mitzvahs, even when we're not in the mood of it, and even when we don't identify with it. And as Rabbi Ari likes to say, you're not in the mood of davening mincha, so what? Yes, and then also we also celebrate, like the Rambam. We also like to have gluten-free donuts and rejoice and find meaning and personal meaning in all the mitzvahs that we do and in our relationship with Hashem. A freilich and Chanukah to all. Happy Chanukah. And it's interesting, I just thought of this right this second, that the notwithstanding the fact that the Rashi and the Torah and all the classic authorities paskin that there's no mitzvah to rejoice on Hanukkah, the mitzvah is only to thank Hashem and praise Hashem and say Halal and Al Hanissim and light the menorah. But yet, Minhag Yisrael Torah, the classical greeting amongst all segments of the Jewish people for Hanukkah is what? Freilich and Chanukah, Chanukah Sameach, rejoice and be happy on Hanukkah. A Freilich and Chanukah to all.